Under the twilight sky, long before time as we know it, there lived a young woman named Medusa, a figure of beauty and grace, whose presence seemed woven from the very moonlight that touched her face. She was no ordinary mortal, and yet no goddess. She was something in between, something fragile, like the first breath of dawn or the shimmer of ocean waves under a soft, silvery moon. Medusa was a priestess of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and her life was one of devotion, duty, and silence. Every morning, Medusa climbed the worn stone steps of Athena's temple, high atop a cliff, where the scent of salt and wildflowers mingled with the cool sea breeze. The temple was a place of serenity, its white stone pillars rising against the endless blue sky, and within its walls, Medusa found a quiet joy. She sang hymns with her fellow priestesses, and together they performed ancient rituals, honoring Athena with the kind of reverence that held their hearts in a delicate, invisible chain. Medusa's beauty was said to be unparalleled, and tales of her radiance spread across lands. Her hair was a cascade of midnight waves, her skin like alabaster, and her eyes held a warmth that softened all who looked upon her. She was known for her kindness, her laughter as light as wind-touched leaves, and for the softness of her heart, which seemed to glow with a rare and gentle wisdom. Even the gods had taken notice of Medusa, for beauty like hers did not pass unnoticed in a world where divinity and mortality intertwined. One day, as Medusa walked alone to the sacred spring to fetch water for the morning rituals, a shadow fell across her path. Poseidon, the god of the vast stormy seas, had seen her. His eyes, dark as the ocean depths, followed her every movement. To him, Medusa was no mere girl. She was a treasure to be claimed, a wild creature of earth and sea that he desired as if she were part of the very waves that danced under his command. Medusa, unaware of the god's presence, continued to the spring, her steps light and unguarded. She filled her clay jar, humming a soft tune, her mind at ease in the sacred grove. But when she looked up, Poseidon stood before her, tall and fearsome, his face etched with an intensity that made her shiver. "Medusa," he said, his voice a deep rumble like the rolling of distant thunder, "your beauty stirs the depths of my soul." Fear gripped Medusa, for she knew the tales of gods and their desires. She took a step back, clutching the jar to her chest. "My lord, I am a servant of Athena, sworn to her temple and her protection. Please let me pass." But Poseidon's desire was like the ocean tide, relentless and unyielding. He did not understand words of refusal, for gods were unaccustomed to resistance. In his presence, Medusa felt like a bird caught in a storm, helpless against the powerful winds that tossed her life into chaos. She turned to run, but Poseidon's will was too strong, his hand reaching out like the dark, merciless waves that dragged ships down into the abyss. There, in Athena's sacred grove, Medusa's pleas were silenced, her innocence torn like a delicate flower crushed underfoot. She lay still, her heart shattered, her body trembling as she lay under the weight of the god's transgression. The earth around her seemed to echo with her brokenness, and the once beautiful spring felt cold and lifeless under her touch. When Athena learned of what had occurred, she appeared in a storm of rage, her silver armor gleaming, her eyes colder than the northern winds. Yet her fury did not turn to Poseidon, her fellow deity, her equal. No, her wrath was directed toward Medusa, the girl who had dared to defile her temple. who had allowed her beauty to provoke a god's desire. "You, Medusa," Athena said, her voice as sharp as a blade, "have tainted my temple with your disgrace. You are unworthy of your beauty, unworthy of the grace you once held." Medusa, her voice trembling, whispered, "I am loyal, my goddess. I begged for your protection." But Athena's heart was hardened, her pride wounded by the presence of Poseidon in her sacred space. And so, with words laced in divine venom, she cast her curse upon Medusa, sealing her fate with a finality as cruel as the gods themselves. Medusa's body began to change. She felt a twisting, writhing pain as the soft black waves of her hair transformed, each strand thickening, coiling, hissing with life as they turned into serpents. Her skin grew pale. As the marble pillars she once tended, her eyes took on a fierce, piercing glow, and the warmth she once held was stripped away, replaced by a chilling gaze that turned all who dared look upon her into cold, unfeeling stone. Her beauty had been twisted, her heart cursed to carry the bitterness of Athena's wrath. She was no longer Medusa, the gentle priestess who sang to the sea. She was now a creature of nightmares, feared and despised by all. Medusa fled, tears falling like pearls as she stumbled to the edge of the world, to a barren island where no mortal dared tread. The island, cold and bleak, was a wasteland of gray rocks and withered earth, a place as lonely as the heart within her. Days passed in silence, and Medusa wandered the island alone, her only companions the serpents that now crowned her head, each hiss a reminder of her lost beauty, her stolen innocence. At first Medusa could not bear her reflection, could not bear the sight of what she had become. She covered her face, hid from her own gaze, but the curse was unyielding, and soon even the creatures that crossed her path were turned to stone by her haunted eyes. Birds fell mid-flight, small animals froze mid-leap, and the island became a graveyard of statues, monuments to her isolation, her unwilling power. Over time, Medusa's sorrow turned to a quiet acceptance, though her heart remained as tender as ever, hidden beneath layers of grief and bitterness. She sat by the shore, watching the waves crash against the rocks, whispering her sorrow to the sea. The serpents became her only companions, twisting and coiling gently as if to comfort her, a strange, twisted reminder of the life she had lost. She began to speak to them in soft tones, telling them stories of the temple, of her sisters, of the days when she was loved and cherished. Years passed in this lonely exile, and Medusa's name grew into legend. Tales of a fearsome creature with a deadly gaze spread across the lands, and soon warriors came to her island, drawn by the challenge, by the thrill of confronting the dreaded Gorgon. They came with swords and shields, but they found only silence, a silence that chilled their bones. For the moment they looked upon her, their bodies turned to stone, joining the silent ranks that littered the island's desolate shore. Medusa wept each time, her heart breaking a little more as she watched these souls fall, powerless to stop the curse that had become her life. She tried to warn them, to hide her gaze, but her efforts were in vain. And so, she sat alone, a queen of stone, surrounded by an army of statues who had dared to face her. One night, under a moon as bright as silver, Medusa knelt by the edge of the sea, her face hidden in her hands, her tears falling into the waves. She whispered to the stars, to the gods who had abandoned her, asking for release, for mercy, for even a sliver of kindness. She had known love, she had known peace, but now her life was a wasteland, a story of beauty turned to sorrow, of innocence devoured by power. And it was there, under that mournful moon, that Perseus arrived, guided by Athena herself, who still harbored resentment against her former priestess. Perseus was armed with a shield as reflective as a mirror, and he had been warned not to look directly at her. As he approached, he caught a glimpse of Medusa's face in his shield, a fleeting, tragic sight. He saw not a monster, but a woman, her eyes filled with sorrow deeper than the ocean, her face haunted by a beauty still hidden within. In a swift, merciful strike, Perseus ended her suffering. Medusa's gaze softened in her final moments, a silent thank you in her eyes as she fell. Her spirit, freed at last from its cursed form, rose like a breath into the night. Her sorrow left behind as a quiet whisper on the wind. They say that if you listen closely to the waves along that desolate shore, you can still hear her voice, soft as the rustling leaves, singing of a beauty too fragile for a world so cruel, a heart that, despite everything, never lost its kindness. And so her story lingers, a reminder of beauty betrayed, of innocence lost, and of a heart that even in exile remained tragically, painfully human.